I pressed my face closer to the depth gauge, squinting at the numbers as they ticked lower with each passing second. 5,000 feet, 5,100, 5,200. Each new reading sent a cold jolt through my chest. "Captain, we're approaching 5,300 feet," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "That's well beyond standard operational depth for a vessel of this class. No submarine in the fleet was rated for this kind of descent, not even the HMS Erebus, despite all its classified modifications. The crushing pressure at this depth made every creak and groan of the hull sound like a warning. I checked the oxygen levels in my tank for the third time. Even though I knew they were fine, the numbers showed exactly what they should. Enough air for 6 hours of submersion with a 3-hour safety margin. Methodical checks were my ritual before every dive. But today felt different. The Mariana Trench wasn't forgiving of mistakes. "Oxygen nominal. Life support systems green across the board," I said, making a mark on my checklist. The cramped interior of the Abyssal Explorer barely gave me room to stretch my legs, but I'd grown used to small spaces over the years. Around me, the research vessel Horizon buzzed with activity. Lab techs rushed back and forth with last-minute data, and the engineering crew ran final systems checks. I'd been on dozens of research expeditions, but the energy today was electric. We were chasing something new. "Marcus, I'm getting some interesting readings on the depth scanner," Sophia Quinn said, approaching with a tablet in hand. Her practical ponytail bobbed as she walked. "Water clarity is better than expected at the target depth, around 60 m of visibility with the Explorer's lights. That's nearly twice what we anticipated." I took the tablet, studying the numbers. "These salinity readings can't be right. The density should be increasing at this depth." "I ran the tests 3 times, Sophia said. "Something about this section of the trench is different. The water column has unusual stratification patterns. That matches the thermal anomalies we detected last month." I handed back the tablet and returned to my equipment check. "Better visibility means better data. I'll adjust the camera settings to maximize our advantage." I opened the small personal storage compartment in the submersible and reached for my toolkit. My fingers brushed against something small and plastic. Pulling it out, I found myself holding a tiny, bright blue seahorse charm, Mary's good luck token. My daughter had pressed it into my palm 3 days ago at the airport. "Take Bruce with you, Dad," she'd said, using the silly name she'd given the toy when she was 7. "He's my best good luck charm." I smiled, remembering how serious her 4-year-old face had looked. "Don't lose him, okay? He keeps you safe underwater." I carefully tucked the seahorse into the breast pocket of my diving suit, making sure it was secure. Mary had her mother's practical nature, but my fascination with the ocean, the perfect combination. Thinking of Mary naturally led to thoughts of Anne. Our last conversation had been civil but strained, typical for us since the divorce 3 years ago. "Another expedition, Marcus? Didn't you just get back from the Arctic?" Her voice had that familiar edge of disappointment. She never understood that the work wasn't just a job, it was who I was. The endless quest to discover what lived in the darkest parts of our planet had cost me my marriage, but I couldn't stop, not even when Anne finally said she'd had enough of my extended absences and single-minded focus on research. "Final systems check complete," I muttered, pushing thoughts of Anne aside. This was no time for distractions. "Marcus, got a minute?" Roman Murphy's authoritative voice pulled me back to the present. The research director stood at the entrance to the submersible bay, his silver-flecked hair neatly trimmed as always. "What have you got, Roman?" I closed the equipment case and gave him my full attention. The latest sensor data from the autonomous drones. He handed me a data pad showing sonar and energy readings. "We've isolated the anomalous signature to a section about 8,500 meters down. It's unlike anything in our records." I studied the readouts, excitement building. These energy patterns, they're almost rhythmic. "That's what caught our attention." Roman pointed to a specific waveform. "At first, we thought it might be geothermal, but the pattern is too regular. And look at this topographical data. There's a formation down there that doesn't match our maps." "Natural or artificial?" I asked, though the question seemed absurd. Nothing artificial should exist at that depth. "That's what you're going down to find out." Roman's eyes held a rare glint of excitement. "Whatever it is, it's big enough to create its own micro-environment. That's why the water conditions are so unusual." I nodded, processing the information. Any theories? Several, but I don't want to bias your observations, Roman said, crossing his arms. The team has been arguing about it for days. Some think it's a new type of hydrothermal vent system. Others suggest uncharted geological formations. Bailey Green is convinced it's a previously unknown ecosystem. And what do you think? I pressed, knowing Roman always had an opinion. He gave me a measured look. I think you should go down there with an open mind and the best equipment we have. Document everything. This could be the discovery that defines your career, Marcus. The weight of his words sank in. After 15 years of oceanic research, I might be on the verge of something truly groundbreaking. The dive window opens in 20 minutes, Roman continued. Weather conditions are optimal, and we've got satellite uplink for continuous data transmission. You'll be sending real-time footage to the team up here. Got it. I began the final equipment check, testing my communication system. Radio check. How do you read? 5 by 5, came the response from Mission Control. Telemetry links are stable. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of activity. I sealed myself into the Abyssal Explorer, running through the launch protocol with mechanical precision. The submersible was a marvel of engineering. A titanium sphere wrapped in composite materials designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trenches. Sealing main hatch, I reported, pulling the heavy door closed and engaging the locks. The satisfying thunk of metal bolts sliding into place signaled my separation from the world above. Explorer secure for launch, came Sophia's voice over the comm. All systems nominal, prepare for deployment. I felt the familiar lurch as the crane lifted the submersible from its cradle. Through the viewport, I watched the research team grow smaller as I was hoisted over the side of the horizon. The bright morning sun glinted off the waves below. Deployment in 3, 2, 1. The Explorer hit the water with a splash, and I immediately felt the change as the ocean embraced the vessel. This was the moment I loved most. The transition from one world to another. Beginning descent, I said, activating the ballast systems. Water filled the external tanks, and the Explorer began to sink beneath the surface. The azure waters around me darkened quickly. At 50 m, the sunlight still penetrated, casting a blue glow through my viewport. By 100 m, the blue had deepened to indigo. The comforting voices from the surface team remained clear in my headset. Passing 500 minutes, I reported. All systems functioning normally. Copy that, Explorer, Roman responded. Your descent rate is optimal. As I sank deeper, I turned on the external lights. They cut through the darkening water, illuminating particles floating in the vast emptiness. This far down, the ocean was no longer a friendly place. It was an alien world where humans could only visit briefly in protective shells like mine. Passing 1000 m, I noted. Entering the midnight zone. The pressure outside the hull was building, over 100 atmospheres now. But inside my tiny bubble of technology, I remained safe. I checked the structural integrity monitors, all green. I continued my descent, reporting depth markers at regular intervals. At 3000 m, I passed through a layer of bioluminescent organisms that sparkled like stars against the black water. Their blue-green light created an ethereal display outside my viewport. Are you seeing this? I asked, adjusting the external cameras to capture the phenomenon. Coming through clearly, Sophia confirmed. Magnificent bioluminescent display, likely Atolla jellyfish and Tomopterus worms. By 5000 m, the true isolation of the deep ocean became apparent. The water pressure outside now exceeded 500 atmospheres, enough to crush an unprotected human instantly. The horizon was a distant point far above, and soon it vanished completely from my senses. I was alone in the darkness. I've lost visual contact with the surface, I reported. Expected at this depth, Roman replied, his voice slightly distorted by the increasing distance. We still have you on tracking. Signal strength remains good. At 7000 minutes, the Explorer entered one of the most remote environments on Earth. Fewer people had visited these depths than had walked on the moon. The temperature outside had dropped to just above freezing, and the pressure continued to build relentlessly. Approaching target depth, I said, checking the navigation system. 8000 m and descending. Copy that, Roman's voice came through with noticeable static. Now you should be nearing the anomaly zone. We're standing by for your observations. I slowed my descent rate, wanting more control. As I approached the target area, the external sensors were all active, collecting data on water chemistry, temperature, pressure, and energy signatures. At 8,400 m, the sonar system pinged, alerting me to something ahead. "I'm getting strong sonar returns," I reported, adjusting the display. "Large formation ahead, approximately 200 meters from my position." "Can you describe it?" Roman asked, his voice tense with anticipation. I peered at the sonar image, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It's massive, not a typical seafloor formation. The structure has unusual angles and protrusions. I adjusted the Explorer's powerful lights to maximum intensity and aimed them forward. The beams cut through the darkness, but revealed nothing yet except the endless black water. "Moving closer," I said, using the thrusters to propel the submersible toward the sonar contact. As I drew nearer, the sonar image became more defined. The object or formation ahead was truly enormous, at least the size of a football field, and had a complexity that didn't match any natural underwater feature I'd ever encountered. "Energy readings are spiking," I reported, watching the instruments. "Whatever it is, it's emitting some kind of electromagnetic field." "Proceed with caution," Roman warned. "Maintain safe distance until we can analyze the data." But scientific curiosity drove me forward. After all, this was why I was here, to discover the unknown. I felt my heart rate quickening as the distance to the anomaly decreased. The seahorse charm pressed against my chest inside my suit pocket, a small reminder of my connection to the world above. At 100 meters from the target, my lights finally reached far enough to catch the edge of something in the darkness. At first, it was just a different shade of black against the void. Then, as I moved closer, details began to emerge. "I have visual contact," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though I knew the team could hear me. The sonar continued pinging rhythmically as I adjusted course directly toward the anomaly. The formation ahead didn't match any known underwater topography. Its surface had an unusual texture, not the random patterns of rock, but something more ordered, more purposeful. My heart rate climbed higher as I realized I might be looking at something that would change our understanding of the deep ocean forever. Whatever lay ahead in the darkness, I was the first human being to see it. With careful movements, I guided the Explorer closer, its lights now fully illuminating what appeared to be the edge of something truly extraordinary. "Control, I'm proceeding deeper into the trench," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my growing excitement. "Current depth is 8,430 m." The vessel made a low, drawn-out, creaking sound as I carefully increased our depth. The pressure at this level was immense, over 800 atmospheres pressing against every inch of the Explorer's hull. Another creak, longer this time, followed by a subtle popping noise from somewhere behind me. "Explorer, we're recording some stress indicators on your hull." Sophia's voice came through, slightly distorted by the depth. "Are you hearing anything concerning?" "Just the usual complaints," I replied, running a quick diagnostic check on my systems. "The old girl's holding together. All integrity readings are within acceptable parameters." I continued deeper, the submersible's external sensors feeding me data about the surrounding environment. The temperature was a constant near freezing, and the pressure continued to climb as I descended further. At 8,470 m, I noticed something new in the darkness beyond my lights. Tiny specks of blue-green light floating like stars in the vast emptiness. They were barely visible at first, just at the edge of perception, but unmistakable. "Control, I'm seeing something unusual," I said, adjusting my course slightly to move toward the lights. "Bioluminescent organisms, blue-green in coloration, very small, possibly planktonic." I checked my reference materials quickly. Nothing in our documented species list matched what I was seeing. Most deep-sea bioluminescence tended toward blue with occasional reds. This was different, a distinctive teal shade with unusual intensity. "Can you capture imagery?" Sophia asked. "Already on it," I said, activating the high-definition external cameras Mickey had upgraded last month. The new system allowed for much better light sensitivity, perfect for documenting faint bioluminescence. The lights are getting denser as I approach. It's like a cloud of them. I switched to the collection systems, also recently upgraded by Mickey. The external mechanisms allowed me to gather water samples and even capture small organisms without leaving the submersible. I carefully collected several samples, making sure to document the exact depth and location of each. Samples collected at 8,475 m I reported. The concentration is increasing dramatically. I've never seen anything like this density of bioluminescent organisms at this depth. As I pushed the Explorer deeper, now past 8,500 m, a depth rarely achieved by human exploration, the lights began to change. What had started as random specks was now taking on structure, the points of light aligning in ways that seemed deliberate. Control. The bioluminescence is forming patterns, I said, unable to keep the wonder from my voice. Not random distributions. There's organization here. I carefully maneuvered closer, the submersible lights illuminating what I could only describe as tendrils of light. Long, flowing strands of bioluminescent organisms stretching upward from below, like an underwater forest caught in a gentle current. Each tendril consisted of thousands of individual points, all pulsing in perfect synchronization. I need to speak with Roman, I said, my fingers moving across the controls to capture as much data as possible. The patterns I'm seeing, they're not random. A minute passed before Roman's voice came through, clear despite the depth. Marshall, what exactly are you seeing? He asked. It's like a forest, Roman. Tendrils of light stretching up from below, some reaching 15 to 20 m in height. The organization is, it follows patterns, mathematical sequences. The spacing between major tendrils appears to follow Fibonacci ratios. The pulsing has a consistent rhythm. I navigated the Explorer carefully between two massive tendrils, each one comprised of millions of tiny organisms, all blinking in perfect unison. The effect was mesmerizing, waves of light rippling through the darkness in all directions. I'm sending up the live feed now, I said, making sure the data uplink was functioning properly. This could completely change our understanding of deep-sea ecosystems. The level of organization suggests some form of communication between organisms. We're receiving the feed, Roman replied after a moment, his typically composed voice tinged with amazement. The team is, well, they're speechless, Marshall. This is unprecedented. I continued to document everything, taking additional samples and capturing footage from multiple angles. The scientific part of my brain was cataloging, measuring, hypothesizing, but another part was simply in awe. In all my years of ocean exploration, I'd never encountered anything this extraordinary. The density increases toward what appears to be the center of the formation, I reported, carefully guiding the Explorer deeper into the forest of light. I'm proceeding with caution. The tendrils grew thicker as I moved forward, forming intricate patterns that reminded me of neural networks. Light pulsed through them in waves, sometimes starting from the bottom and flowing upward, other times radiating outward from central points. Marshall, we're picking up unusual energy readings from your location. Sophia's voice came through, tinged with concern. Nothing dangerous, but definitely unusual. Are you registering anything on your instruments? I checked my readouts. Minor electromagnetic fluctuations, but nothing that would interfere with the Explorer's systems. The bioluminescence seems to be generating its own field. I felt a mixture of scientific caution and pure excitement. This discovery could represent an entirely new form of deep-sea life, one with levels of organization previously thought impossible at these depths. The implications for marine biology, for our understanding of how life could evolve in extreme environments, were enormous. I'm approaching what appears to be the center of the formation, I said, keeping my voice level despite my racing thoughts. The light patterns are intensifying. As I moved closer to the apparent center, the pulsing of the lights grew more pronounced, more rhythmic. The blue-green glow filled the Explorer's cabin, casting everything in an otherworldly light. It was almost hypnotic, the way the patterns flowed and changed, drawing me deeper into their display. The central area is approximately 30 miles ahead, I reported. The bioluminescent activity is at least 5 times more intense than at the periphery. I carefully adjusted my course, moving between the massive tendrils that now surrounded the Explorer on all sides. The lights pulsed faster as I approached the center, their rhythm becoming more complex, more compelling. Control, I'm maintaining position at 8,520 m, I said, proceeding toward the center at minimal speed. The lights continued to pulse around me, their glow intensifying with each meter I advanced. They seemed to be responding to my presence, or perhaps to the Explorer itself, their patterns shifting and flowing, as if in reaction to our movement through their midst. Control, are you seeing this? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. The patterns are getting more organized. Sophia's voice crackled through the comm. We're recording everything, Marshall. Can you describe what you're observing? I tried to formulate a response, but found myself tracking a particular sequence of lights that rippled from left to right across my viewport. My thoughts slowed, becoming as fluid as the water outside. The tension in my shoulders melted away. How long had I been watching? Seconds? Minutes? Marshall, we need verbal confirmation. Sorry, I said, blinking slowly. It's just beautiful. The lights seem to follow each other. There's a rhythm to them. I reached for my tablet to record some measurements, but my hand moved as if through honey. The urgency that normally drove my scientific observations had dissolved into a pleasant calm. I managed to activate the spectral analyzer, watching as wavelength data scrolled across the screen. Dr. Bell, this is Milo. Johnston's voice cut through my haze with its clinical precision. I'm monitoring your cerebral activity from up here, and I'm seeing some unusual theta wave patterns. Your brain activity is shifting toward frequencies associated with deep meditation or early-stage sleep. I nodded, though no one could see me. That makes sense. I feel relaxed. Marshall, that's concerning, Milo replied. You shouldn't be experiencing altered consciousness during this dive. I knew he was right, but couldn't muster the appropriate concern. The lights pulsed in sequences that pulled at my attention. I tried to focus on the instruments to document the phenomenon properly, but my gaze kept drifting back to the viewport. I'm taking measurements, I said, though my fingers moved sluggishly across the controls. Wavelength peaks at 480, 2 nano, intensity fluctuating between. The numbers blurred as another pattern caught my eye. Sorry, lost my train of thought. The lights outside seemed to brighten in response to my voice, their rhythm quickening slightly. I tilted my head, watching as the pattern shifted. Did you see that? I asked, suddenly more alert. They changed when I spoke. Can you clarify, Marshall? Roman's voice, now sharp with interest. I shook my head, trying to clear it. The patterns, they changed when I talked, like they're responding to the submersible. I tapped the external hull gently with my knuckle, and immediately the lights nearest that section flared brighter, their rhythm disrupting before settling into a new pattern. They're responding to stimulus, I said, more focused now. I'm going to test this. I engaged the thrusters, moving the Explorer 2M to the left. The lights swirled and followed the movement, their patterns shifting and flowing around the new position. I stopped, waited 30 seconds, then moved 2M right again, and the lights responded, reorganizing themselves around the submersible. Control, are you getting this? The bioluminescence is tracking the Explorer's movements. This isn't random. They're reacting to us specifically. We're seeing it, Roman confirmed. Try changing your depth slightly. I adjusted the ballast, rising 3M. The light patterns stretched upward, following my ascent, their rhythm quickening. When I descended back to my original position, they condensed again, the pulses slowing to their previous cadence. This is incredible, I said, my scientific curiosity temporarily overriding the strange lethargy. They're not just responding to physical presence. They're adjusting their entire communication pattern based on our movements. Communication pattern? Sophia questioned. You're suggesting these are signals? I watched as the lights continued their dance around the Explorer. Ray's theories about deep-sea bioluminescent communication might have been more on target than we realized, I replied. But this goes beyond simple signaling between organisms. What do you mean? Sophia asked. The lights pulsed faster, drawing my attention back to their hypnotic rhythm. I lost myself in their flow for several seconds before remembering the question. This is coordinated, I finally answered. Most bioluminescent communication we've documented is between individuals or small groups. Mating signals, warnings, lures for prey. This is different. It's like a network. The entire formation is behaving as a single entity. I checked the chronometer and blinked in surprise. 23 minutes had passed since my last time check, though it felt like only 5. The pleasant fog had settled back over my thoughts, making it difficult to maintain focus on anything but the lights. Marshall. Milo's voice again, more urgent now. Your heart rate has decreased to 50, 2 beats per minute. Respiration is shallow. These readings match patterns seen in hypnotic states. I heard him, but couldn't quite process the concern in his voice. The lights pulsed in sequences that seemed meaningful, almost like words written in an alphabet I couldn't quite read. Dr. Bell, Milo's voice sharpened. I need you to look away from the viewport, now. In a minute, I murmured. I'm observing something important here. Your blood pressure is dropping, Milo continued, his voice tight. Whatever you're seeing is affecting your autonomic nervous system. Break visual contact immediately. Something in his tone finally cut through the haze. With significant effort, I forced myself to turn away from the viewport, looking down at the instrument panel instead. The effort was like pulling away from a powerful magnet. My heart pounded suddenly, adrenaline cutting through the lethargy. I'm okay, I said, though my voice shook slightly. Just got caught up in observation. Your vital signs are already normalizing, Milo noted. Marshall, whatever that light pattern is, it's having a direct neurological effect on you. The realization hit me with disturbing clarity. I'd been sitting there, gradually slipping into an altered state without even noticing. The scientific part of my brain kicked back into gear, now seeing the lights not just as a fascinating phenomenon but as a potential danger. Control, we need to analyze the video feed, I said, still keeping my eyes averted from the viewport. The light patterns might match known hypnotic frequencies. Bailey should review the footage. She might be able to determine if this resembles any documented biological lure mechanisms. Already on it, Roman replied. Bailey's setting up analysis parameters now. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I think we found something that goes well beyond bioluminescent communication. These organisms aren't just signaling each other. They're capable of affecting consciousness. My hand moved toward the control panel, and I realized I was unconsciously trying to turn back toward the viewport. I pulled it back, disturbed by how strong the compulsion was. I want to keep observing, I said, but we need safety protocols. Milo, can you set up an alert that will trigger if my vital signs show I'm falling into that state again? Already done, he replied. And Marshall, don't look directly at those patterns for more than a few seconds at a time. I nodded, though the desire to turn and lose myself in the rhythmic beauty of the lights remained powerfully tempting. Marshall, how are you feeling now? Milo asked through the comm. I reached for the water bottle strapped to the side of my seat. Better. Give me a second. The cool water helped ground me as I took several long swallows. The plastic crinkled loudly in the small cabin as I squeezed the bottle. The sound, sharp and real compared to the dreamlike quality the lights had induced. My head's clearer now, I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. But that was intense, like being pulled under by a current. Your vitals are normalizing, Milo replied. Heart rate coming back up, brain activity shifting to normal patterns. I ran a hand across my face, feeling the stubble on my cheeks. The cramped interior of the Explorer felt more real now, the hard edges of the control panel solid under my fingers. I checked the oxygen readout, still plenty left. The clock showed I'd lost almost half an hour staring at those lights. That was concerning. I glanced at the instrument panel, careful to keep my eyes off the viewport. The sonar readings showed something massive beneath us, but the details were fuzzy. I needed a better look. I'm going to adjust the external lights, I told Control. Point them downward instead of straight ahead. That might give us a view without me having to look directly at the bioluminescence. Proceed with caution, Roman's voice came through. But this is remarkable data already. I reached for the lighting controls, keeping my gaze fixed on the panel. The submersible had 8 powerful external spotlights that could be independently adjusted. I rotated all of them to point downward at a steep angle, away from the field of lights that had been mesmerizing me. Lights repositioned, I reported. I'm going to check the video feed on the monitor instead of looking through the viewport. Should give me some distance from the direct effect. I switched on the main display, which showed the camera feed from the external lights now pointing downward beneath the Explorer. What I saw made me forget to breathe. Oh my God, I whispered. What is it? Sophia asked, her voice sharp with concern. What are you seeing? On the screen, illuminated by the powerful spotlights, was not the ocean floor I'd expected, but something else entirely. The thousands of bioluminescent tendrils I'd been observing weren't separate organisms at all. They all connected to a massive central structure beneath them, like countless tentacles or filaments extending from a single body. It's one thing, I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. I cleared my throat and tried again. The lights, the tendrils, they're not separate organisms. They're all part of one massive entity. The central mass was enormous, with a textured surface that pulsed slightly. The tendrils grew from it like hair from a scalp, or perhaps more like the sensitive whiskers of some deep-sea creature. My mind raced to find comparisons, but nothing in my experience matched what I was seeing. "I need you to clarify, Marshall," Roman said, his academic tone barely masking his excitement. "Are you saying the bioluminescent strands are all connected?" "Yes," I said, adjusting the camera angle to take in more of the massive thing below me. "They all connect to a central body. It's huge, Roman. I'm trying to estimate the size now." I checked the sonar readings again, comparing them with the visual feed. The central mass appeared to be roughly circular, though with irregular edges. Using the explorer's instruments, I took measurements as best I could. Based on these readings, I'd estimate the central mass at approximately 200 meters across. I reported, my voice steadier now, as I fell back on scientific observation. The tendrils extend outward another 100 meters in all directions, creating a total diameter of about 400 meters. "That's impossible," Sophia muttered, but I could hear the awe in her voice. "That would make it the largest known invertebrate by a factor of, I can't even calculate it." "I'm sending you the feed now," I said, transmitting the data up to the horizon. "Tell me you're seeing this too." "We're receiving," Roman confirmed after a moment. "This is unprecedented." I continued to study the feed, noting details. The surface appears to be semi-translucent, with some kind of internal structures visible. There's movement inside it, almost like circulation. As I watched, I noticed the light patterns in the tendrils were changing. They had been pulsing somewhat randomly before, but now they seemed to be synchronizing, creating waves of light that traveled across the entire field in coordinated patterns. "The light display is intensifying," I reported. "The patterns are becoming more organized, more synchronized. It's like they're responding to our presence, or maybe to the spotlights." I adjusted the camera again, trying to get a better view of the central mass. Something was happening there. A section of the surface was changing. "Opening movement detected," I said, checking the instruments. "There's activity in the central mass." The submersible sensors picked up a subtle current shift as the thing below us moved. I felt a slight tremor through the explorer's hull. "I'm seeing movement in what appears to be the center of the organism," I continued, zooming in with the camera. "There's an opening forming." The surface of the central mass parted, revealing a dark cavity. Then something emerged from within, a massive round structure that pushed up toward the surface. As it came into the light from my spotlights, I felt my stomach drop. I think it's an eye," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking at what appears to be an enormous eye-like structure." The structure did indeed resemble an eye, a massive orb with a dark center surrounded by tissue that looked remarkably like an iris. It turned slowly, seeming to focus on the explorer. "I'm capturing footage now," I said, activating the high-resolution recording systems. "The eye-like structure is approximately 20 meters in diameter. The surface is reflective, similar to the tapetum lucidum found in deep-sea organisms that enhances light sensitivity." As I recorded, a theory began to form in my mind. "I think I understand the function of the light display now," I said. "It's not just communication, it's a lure, and possibly a sensory organ too." "Explain," Roman prompted. "The light patterns are hypnotic, as we've discovered," I said, keeping my eyes carefully on the instrument panel rather than the viewport. "They affect consciousness, induce a trance-like state. In the deep ocean, that could attract prey, mesmerize them until they're close enough to capture." I paused, considering the implications. "But the patterns are too complex to be just a lure. The way they change and respond suggests they're also sensing, gathering information about whatever approaches. The lights are both attracting prey and studying it." That's brilliant," Roman said. "A dual-purpose adaptation, perfectly suited for the deep ocean environment." I nodded, though no one could see me. "It makes evolutionary sense. Resources are scarce down here. Any advantage in locating and capturing food would be strongly selected for." As I continued watching the monitor, I noticed the light patterns changing again. They were becoming more rapid, more intense, pulsing in what seemed like increasingly complex sequences. Despite my resolve to avoid looking directly at them, I found my attention drawn to them again. "They're beautiful," I murmured, my gaze now fixed on the swirling lights outside rather than on the monitor. "Marshall, your vitals are shifting again." Milo's voice came through, sounding distant. Look away from the viewport. I heard him, but the warning didn't seem important anymore. The lights were speaking to me, telling me something important. I felt a connection forming, not just visual stimulation, but something deeper, as if the patterns were reaching into my mind, forming pathways, creating understanding. I can almost understand it, I said, my voice slow and dreamy. There's meaning in the patterns. Marshall. The sharp voice in my ear made me jump. Your brain activity is showing the same pattern as before. You're slipping back into the hypnotic state. With tremendous effort, I tore my gaze from the viewport and looked down at my hands. They were gripping the control panel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. I forced my fingers to release, flexing them painfully. Sorry, I said, my voice shaky. It's stronger now, harder to resist. We should abort, Sophia suggested. Bring you back up before it. No, I interrupted. This is too important. I just need to be more careful. I turned back to the monitor, which showed the massive eye still watching the explorer. Something about that unblinking gaze sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the near-freezing temperatures outside the submersible. I'm a scientist, I reminded myself, as much as the team listening above. I need to maintain objectivity here. But objectivity was difficult when faced with something so far beyond our understanding. Fear and wonder battled within me. Fear of this unknown creature with its hypnotic powers, and wonder at the discovery of something so extraordinary, so alien, yet existing here on Earth. I've never seen anything like this, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. It challenges everything we know about deep-sea life, about the limits of biological complexity in extreme environments. I checked the recording systems, making sure we were capturing everything. Future scientists would study this footage for decades, I was certain, if I could just maintain my focus long enough to document it properly. The eye is tracking the submersible, I noted, watching as the massive orb shifted slightly to follow the explorer's position. It's aware of us, studying us just as we're studying it. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, scientific excitement, primal fear, and something else. Something like recognition, as if this creature and I were engaged in a form of communication that transcended conventional understanding. The thought both fascinated and terrified me. A sudden, violent jolt threw me against my harness. The explorer rocked sideways, knocking my head against the control panel. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard as I grabbed the navigation joystick to stabilize our position. What the hell? I muttered, blinking away stars from the impact. The submersible shuddered again, harder this time. A heart-stopping impact from below. Metal groaned. I was fully alert now, adrenaline clearing away any remaining trace of the light-induced trance. Control, something's hitting us, I said, voice tight as I checked the external cameras. Marshall, we're seeing unusual movement on the feed, Sophia replied. Can you confirm what's happening? I switched to the downward camera and froze. Rising through the forest of glowing tendrils was something massive and sinuous, darker than the surrounding water, and moving with deliberate purpose. The shape twisted upward, its surface reflecting the explorer's spotlights as it approached. Oh God, I whispered as understanding dawned. It's a tentacle. I watched in horror as the enormous appendage, easily 3 m wide, rose through the bioluminescent field and wrapped around the lower section of the explorer. The metal hull creaked in protest as the tentacle tightened its grip. Control. The structure isn't a colony or a reef. It's a single organism. We're dealing with a massive cephalopod, I shouted into the comm. The lights, the tendrils, they're all part of a lure, like an anglerfish. But on a possible scale. I heard gasps and rapid conversations in the background at control. Roman's voice cut through the chaos. Are you certain, Marshall? Absolutely certain. I'm looking at a tentacle wrapped around our hull right now. The bioluminescent tendrils aren't separate organisms. They're specialized appendages. The whole thing is one creature, and it's using light patterns to attract and disorient prey. I swallowed hard. That's us, by the way. We're the prey. The vessel lurched again as the tentacle constricted. Warning indicators flashed across my control panel, hull pressure readings spiking into the red. Marshall, we're registering hull integrity compromised at 2 points, Sophia reported, her voice clinical but tight with tension. Sections 5B and 7A show microfractures forming. Current depth puts external pressure at approximately 850 atmospheres. I didn't need the reminder of what would happen if those microfractures expanded. At this depth, water would cut through the smallest opening like a hypersonic jet. Initiating emergency ascent protocols, I announced, flipping the safety cover off the emergency thruster controls. I punched the activation sequence, bracing for the sudden acceleration. Nothing happened. I tried again, jabbing the button with increasing force. The thrusters whined, but produced no movement. The Explorer remained firmly in the creature's grasp. "Thrusters not responding," I reported, trying to keep my voice steady. "The tentacle must be blocking the propulsion system." "This is Brooke Burgess," a new voice cut in. "I'm initiating remote diagnostic on your damage assessment systems. Can you manually override thrust vectoring to ports 2 and 4? I reached for the secondary controls, adjusting the thruster configuration to redirect all power to the unobstructed ports. "Attempting manual override now," I confirmed, entering the emergency codes. The submersible vibrated as the remaining functional thrusters engaged, but we barely moved. The tentacle's grip was too strong, holding us in place with terrifying ease. "No good," I said. "We're still caught." On the external feed, I watched with growing dread as another massive tentacle rose from below, joining the first. This one was even larger, with visible suction cups the size of dinner plates. It moved with deliberate slowness, wrapping around the midsection of the Explorer. The metal hull protested with a long, agonizing groan. "Second tentacle engaged," I reported, feeling sweat bead on my forehead despite the cool temperature inside the cabin. "It's constricting the vessel." The Explorer tilted at a dangerous angle as the creature adjusted its grip. Equipment that wasn't secured clattered across the floor. My tablet slid off the console, smashing against the far wall. "Marshall, your oxygen recycling system is showing stress," Sophia warned. "The constriction might be damaging the external components." I glanced at the life support readings. They were holding for now, but any further damage could change that quickly. The bioluminescent display outside intensified, the patterns becoming more rapid and complex. The lights now seemed aimed directly at the viewport, pulsing with mesmerizing rhythm. Despite the immediate danger, I found my attention drawn to them again. The beautiful patterns seemed to whisper that everything would be okay if I just relaxed and watched them dance. "Marshall, Marshall, respond." Milo's voice seemed distant, though I knew he was shouting. With tremendous effort, I wrenched my gaze away from the viewport, focusing instead on the emergency protocols checklist mounted on the side panel. "I'm here," I said, my voice sounding slurred even to my own ears. "The lights, they're stronger now, targeted." I blinked hard and slapped my own face, fighting the drowsiness that threatened to overtake me. "It's a hunting mechanism," I said as clarity returned. "The lights don't just attract prey, they sedate it. Like how a python constricts its prey while the victim slowly loses consciousness from lack of oxygen." I laughed bitterly. "Efficient design, really. Your neural patterns are showing the same entrainment effect as before, but more pronounced," Milo Johnston said. "Whatever those light patterns are doing, they're directly affecting your brain activity." "It's trying to put me to sleep, Milo," I explained, keeping my eyes fixed on the instrument panel. "The creature uses the lights to induce a trance state while it crushes its prey, less struggling that way. Probably evolved to catch large marine mammals or other deep-sea predators." The submersible creaked again as the tentacles tightened further. A new alarm joined the chorus of warnings. Oxygen levels dropping as the recycling system struggled under the pressure. "Oxygen warning," I reported unnecessarily as red lights flashed across the cabin. "The main recycling unit must be damaged." I checked the gauge, 15 minutes of primary oxygen remaining, with emergency reserves adding another 10. 25 minutes before I'd start to lose consciousness, assuming the hull held that long. "Marshall, we are preparing recovery options," Roman said, his voice steady despite the situation. "The horizon is repositioning for emergency retrieval." I wanted to laugh. The horizon was nearly 3 kilometers above us, and their retrieval equipment wasn't designed to wrestle prey from a colossal deep-sea predator. The pressure around the Explorer increased again, and I heard a new sound, a high-pitched whine of metal under extreme stress. The viewport, designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep ocean, now faced the additional strain of the creature's grip. A hairline crack appeared at the edge of the reinforced glass. Viewport integrity compromised, I said, unable to keep the fear from my voice now. If it gives way. I didn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen if the viewport failed at this depth. The pressure would crush me instantly. The oxygen warning changed from yellow to red, the estimated time dropping to 12 minutes as the system deteriorated further. The creature's tentacles continued their relentless constriction, the pressure increasing around us with each passing second. I stared at the instrument panel, watching the hull integrity percentages dropping steadily, our situation growing more dire by the second. Control. Situation critical. Need immediate assistance with emergency protocols. My voice stayed steady, despite everything. Copy, Marshal. What's your status? Cheryl's voice came through with minimal static. Power reserves at 65%. I tapped the system diagnostic panel, bringing up detailed readouts of every subsystem, estimating 11 minutes of oxygen before complete system failure. Maria, are you there? I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on the instrument panel, avoiding the viewport where those hypnotic light patterns continued their dance. I'm here, Marshal. Maria's voice was clipped. Professional. What do you need? What countermeasures do we have for the electrical systems? Anything that could create a massive power surge to external components. A pause. You're talking about overloading something? The external lights. I need to know if we can redirect all available power to them. That's not what they're designed for. Maria's hesitation was clear. You'd blow every circuit in the lighting array, possibly the entire electrical system. Another warning flashed. Hull integrity 69%. The Explorer's frame gave a low groan as the pressure intensified. I don't have many options left, I said, fingers flying across the keyboard as I ran more diagnostics. Battery reserves are dropping faster than expected. The creature's constriction is affecting power distribution to critical systems. The tentacle shifted, causing the Explorer to tilt at an alarming angle. I grabbed the console to steady myself. Marshal, what exactly are you planning? Cheryl asked. I took a deep breath, careful not to look directly at the swirling lights outside. Instead, I focused on a memory. Bella Santos's presentation from last year's Deep-Sea Symposium. Her research on abyssal predators had seemed speculative at the time, but now, Bella's research, I said. Remember her paper on sensory adaptation in deep-sea predators? She theorized that organisms at extreme depths would develop hypersensitivity to any light source as an evolutionary advantage. I remember, Cheryl replied. She suggested that bioluminescence served as both lure and communication. Yes, but the corollary was that any creature using light as a hunting mechanism would have extreme sensitivity to light itself. I pulled up the external camera feed on my monitor, studying the massive eye structure that had emerged from the central mass. This thing has evolved in perpetual darkness. Its entire hunting strategy revolves around controlled light emission. The Explorer creaked again as the pressure increased. Hull integrity dropped to 66%. I think I see where you're going, Maria cut in. But Marshal, the external lighting system Aiden installed isn't designed to handle that kind of power. You'd need to override at least 7 safety protocols. Then talk me through it, I said. How do I bypass the safety systems? A long pause followed. I knew what they were thinking. The risks were enormous, but the alternative was worse. Cheryl, I need to try something, I said, my decision made. I'm going to overload the external lighting system, create a massive strobe effect directly at what appears to be its eye structure. Marshal, Cheryl began. 9 minutes of oxygen remaining. I cut in. Hull integrity decreasing. This is the only plan I've got. Another pause. Then, Maria, walk him through it. Maria's voice became crisp, professional. You'll need to access the power distribution subroutine first. Enter command code Theta-94 Delta. I typed in the code, bringing up a new screen showing power allocation throughout the Explorer's systems. Now redirect auxiliary power from non-essential systems, communications buffer, secondary environmental controls, data recording. My fingers moved across the keyboard, reallocating power reserves. Marshal, your oxygen recycling will suffer, Cheryl warned. Better than being crushed, I replied, continuing to work. The Explorer shuddered again, more violently this time. Hull integrity dropped to 63%. Next, Maria continued, you'll need to override the thermal protection on the lighting array. That's a physical switch under the secondary control panel. I reached under the console, feeling for the switch. Finding it, I flipped it to the override position. Another warning light appeared. Thermal protection disabled. Now the hard part, Maria said. You'll need to manually increase the power capacity to the external lights. That's not something the system is designed to allow. Talk me through it, I said, feeling sweat bead on my forehead despite the cool air in the cabin. Access the command terminal. You'll need to enter a developer override. Maria gave me a string of commands, which I typed in carefully. That will let you modify the power limiters, but Marshall, this will burn out the entire system. Once you do this, those lights will never work again. If this doesn't work, neither will I muttered, entering the final command. A new warning appeared. Power limiters disabled. Catastrophic system failure possible. The tentacle constricted again, and I heard a new sound. A metallic groan followed by a sharp ping. Something had given way in the hull structure. Hull integrity, 58%, I reported, my voice tight. Oxygen now at 8 minutes. I could feel the frame of the Explorer beginning to bend under the immense pressure. The hairline crack in the viewport had extended by several centimeters. Almost ready, I said, programming the lighting sequence. I'm setting up a randomized strobe pattern at maximum intensity, focused primarily on the main floodlights facing the eye structure. I worked methodically despite the danger, setting up the sequence to hit the creature with everything the Explorer's lights could produce. The programming itself wasn't complex, but my hands shook slightly as I typed, making it harder. Marshall, be aware that this will likely trigger a complete electrical shutdown, Maria warned. The surge protection will trip, cutting power to everything except emergency life support. Understood. I switched to the emergency systems, making sure they were ready. Emergency life support status? Operational, Cheryl confirmed, but it's minimal. Just oxygen and basic temperature control. No communications, no external sensors. The tentacle shifted again, causing the Explorer to lurch sideways. I braced myself against the console as metal screamed under pressure. Hull integrity 53%, I reported, preparing to execute the sequence. I took one final look around the cramped cabin of the Explorer. My gaze fell on the tiny plastic seahorse charm, Mary's gift, taped to the edge of my console. I reached out and touched it gently. Marshall, Cheryl's voice was tense. Are you ready? I took a deep breath, executing now. With a final keystroke, I activated the sequence. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the cabin was bathed in reflected light, as every external lamp on the Explorer blazed to life at maximum intensity, far beyond their design capacity. The effect outside was immediate and dramatic. Through the monitor, I saw the massive eye structure recoil, the pupil contracting violently. The bioluminescent tendrils, which had been pulsing in their hypnotic rhythm, suddenly flared in a chaotic pattern. The lights began to strobe, flashing in the randomized sequence I'd programmed. Bright, brighter, blindingly bright, then off for a microsecond before repeating in a different pattern. The effect was disorienting even on my monitor. I could only imagine what it was doing to a creature evolved for darkness. The Explorer's electrical system protested immediately. Warning messages cascaded across my screens. Thermal overload, circuit integrity failure, power surge detected. The tentacles around the Explorer spasmed. I felt the grip loosen slightly, then tighten again as if in pain or anger. It's working, I called out. But the Explorer was failing too. The lights flickered as components burned out. The cabin lights dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again as power surged erratically through the system. Marshall, your power grid is collapsing. Maria's voice came through, breaking up. You have seconds before total system failure. The tentacle convulsed again, more violently this time. I felt the Explorer shift upward slightly as the grip loosened. Then, with a final surge, every light in the cabin went out. The monitors died. The comms fell silent. For a terrible moment, I was in complete darkness and silence, feeling the Explorer still gripped by the creature, uncertain if my gamble had worked. The emergency lights came on, dim red illumination casting eerie shadows. The minimal life support system hummed to life, its display showing basic readings: oxygen, temperature, pressure, nothing else. I held my breath, waiting. Then I felt it, a change in pressure, a shift in the Explorer's position. The tentacle was unwinding, releasing its grip. Through the viewport, the crack hadn't grown any larger. I could see the bioluminescent display had changed completely. Instead of the organized, hypnotic pattern, the lights were flashing chaotically, like a system in panic. The Explorer began to rise, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The creature had let go. My desperate plan had worked. I sat back in my seat, watching the depth gauge on the emergency panel as we ascended. The minimal buoyancy system was functioning, carrying us upward, away from the creature, and toward the surface. I glanced at Mary's seahorse charm, still attached to my console in the dim red light. I needed more light. I reached for the auxiliary panel and flipped the switch for the secondary lighting system. Nothing happened at first. Then a low hum built as power diverted to the external arrays. I hit the override sequence Maria had walked me through, pushing the system beyond its limits. The darkness outside my viewport suddenly vanished. Light, impossibly bright, painfully intense light, erupted from every external lamp on the Explorer. The beams cut through the black water like lasers, illuminating particles and creating a blinding fog effect around the submersible. I squinted against the glare, even though it was outside the hull. Maximum intensity achieved, I muttered to myself, activating the strobe sequence. The lights began to flash in rapid, irregular patterns. The kind of chaotic pulsing that would wreak havoc on light-sensitive organs evolved in perpetual darkness. Through the strobing effect, I saw the massive bioluminescent field surrounding the Explorer react. The beautiful, hypnotic patterns that had nearly lured me into a trance state earlier now flickered erratically. The elegant blue-green tendrils that had seemed so mesmerizing now darkened section by section, like a power grid shutting down during a blackout. I pressed my face closer to the viewport, keeping my gaze clinical and detached, despite the disorienting strobe. The creature's massive eye structure, that 20M orb that had studied me with such apparent intelligence, contracted violently. I could see it recoiling, pulling back from the assault of artificial light. "It's working," I whispered, watching as the tentacles that had been constricting the Explorer began to loosen their grip. The pressure readings on my hull integrity display ticked upward slightly, from 58% back to 61%. The tentacles, each as wide as a subway tunnel, quivered against the Explorer's hull. I could feel the vibrations through the metal frame, a low-frequency tremor that made my teeth chatter. Then, with a sudden release that sent the Explorer rocking sideways, the first tentacle unwrapped itself and withdrew. I grabbed the edge of the console to steady myself as the Explorer lurched again. The second tentacle was retreating too, sliding across the viewport like a living shadow before disappearing into the strobing darkness. Through the chaos of light and shadow, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving below, the central body of the creature withdrawing, retreating from the sensory assault I had unleashed. "Control, the organism is retreating," I reported, but my words died in the empty air of the cabin. The comm system was offline. Another casualty of my desperate power surge. A sudden electric sizzle from behind me made me turn. Sparks erupted from the auxiliary power junction box, followed by a wisp of acrid smoke. Warning lights flashed across every panel, and a high-pitched alarm began to wail. "No, no, no," I muttered, lunging for the master systems panel. I tried to isolate the overload, but it was spreading too quickly through the Explorer's electrical grid. One by one, systems began to fail. Navigation, external sensors, main life support. The displays flickered and died as circuit breakers tripped throughout the vessel. Outside, the blinding lights suddenly intensified to an impossible brightness. For one brief moment, the entire trench was illuminated like daylight, revealing the full scale of the creature as it retreated, a colossal shadow against the newly brightened abyss. Then, with a final surge, every external light blew out simultaneously. The darkness that followed was absolute. I blinked, temporarily blinded by the afterimage of that final flash. Inside the Explorer, even the warning lights had gone dark. The alarm cut off mid-wail, leaving only the sound of my breathing and the creaking of the hull as we continued to ascend. After a few seconds that stretched like hours, the emergency system kicked in. Dim red lights activated around the perimeter of the cabin, casting just enough illumination to see the instruments directly in front of me. The backup life support hummed to life, its fans stirring the stale air. I took stock of my situation. The main power was completely dead. The navigation system was offline, External cameras and sensors were fried. The main oxygen recycling system had failed. I was drifting in a crippled submersible nearly 8,500 meters below the surface, with only emergency systems functioning. But I was alive, and I was rising. I located the backup communication system, an old-school analog radio with its own isolated power supply, designed specifically for catastrophic failures like this one. I pulled the handset from its cradle and thumbed the transmit button. Horizon Control, this is Explorer. Do you copy? Over. My voice sounded rough even to my own ears. Static hissed from the speaker, broken by fragments of what might have been words. I adjusted the frequency slightly and tried again. Horizon Control, Explorer. Emergency situation. Main systems failure. Currently ascending on emergency buoyancy. Do you copy? This time the static cleared slightly and Sophia's voice came through, broken but understandable. XPL, got copy. Status report. I pressed the handset closer to my mouth. Control, Explorer. I've suffered complete electrical failure following the defensive measure. The creature has released the submersible and retreated. Emergency buoyancy system is functional. Emergency life support operational. No navigation control. I am currently drifting while ascending. Over. More static then. Copy. That. Your position. Tracking. Continue. Report. Vital signs. I checked the medical monitor on my wrist. One of the few systems with its own power source. Vital signs stable. Heart rate elevated but within parameters. No injuries to report beyond minor contusions from impact. Oxygen levels in cabin adequate on emergency recycling. The radio crackled again, and this time Sophia's voice came through more clearly. Marshall, we're tracking your ascent. Current depth reading 8,100 m. Ascent rate stable at approximately 12 m per minute. Carl is preparing recovery operations now. What's the ETA on recovery? I asked, calculating in my head. At my current rate, I'd reach a depth where standard recovery vehicles could operate in about 6 hours, but my emergency systems wouldn't last that long. Carl estimates 3 hours until recovery can begin, Sophia replied. He's prepping the deep-sea recovery system now. The Remora will be deployed to intercept you at approximately 3,000 meters. 3 hours. That was cutting it close, but should be manageable if my emergency systems held out. Copy that. I'll continue monitoring ascent and conserve power where possible. Marshall. Sophia's voice softened slightly. That was quick thinking with the lights. The feed cut out, but we saw enough to know your plan worked. Are you certain the organism has retreated? I glanced at the emergency sonar display, one of the few instruments still functioning. The screen showed empty water below me with no sign of the massive shape that had nearly crushed the Explorer. Sonar is clear. No sign of the organism in detection range. I believe the light overload was effective. These deep-sea creatures evolve with extreme sensitivity to light. The strobing effect likely caused sensory overload. Understood. Maintain communication at 5-minute intervals. We'll alert you to any changes in recovery plans. Copy that. Control. Explorer out. I replaced the handset and leaned back in my seat, letting out a long, slow breath. Despite the crisis, my scientific mind was already processing what I'd witnessed. I needed to document everything while it was fresh. I reached for my personal tablet, a rugged model with its own battery that I always kept in a waterproof case for precisely this type of situation. The tablet screen illuminated my face as I opened a new file and began recording. I spoke clearly, organizing my thoughts as I detailed everything about the encounter. Research log, Marshall Bell, Abyssal Explorer mission, depth at observation, approximately 8,500 meters within the trench. Subject, encounter with unknown cephalopod species of unprecedented size. I continued methodically, describing the creature's physical characteristics in as much detail as possible. The central mass approximately 200 meters in diameter, the tentacles extending outward at least 100 m each. The massive eye structure, the bioluminescent tendrils that served as both lure and sensory organs. The organism employs a sophisticated hunting strategy, utilizing bioluminescent patterns that appear to induce a hypnotic or trance-like state in potential prey. I continued, recalling the strange pull I had felt when watching the lights. The effect seems to be neurological rather than purely visual, suggesting a possible electromagnetic component to the bioluminescence. I documented the creature's hunting behavior, its response to the explorer, the way it had used its tentacles to constrict the submersible, and its retreat when confronted with the overloaded lighting system. I included every detail I could remember, speaking for nearly 30 minutes without pause. When I finished the verbal report, I used the tablet's camera to photograph the instrument readings still visible on the emergency displays. I also took several photos of the water samples I had collected earlier, which contained trace elements of the creature's bioluminescent material. I checked the emergency oxygen display. The recycling system was operating at minimum efficiency, but it showed enough capacity to last approximately 4 hours. The emergency power reserves were at 87% and draining slowly. Both should be sufficient until the recovery team reached me. Next, I carefully examined the water sample containers. They were secured in a shock-resistant rack and appeared undamaged by the electrical surge or the creature's attack. Each container held approximately 500 milliliters of seawater collected at various depths, including samples taken directly from the bioluminescent field surrounding the creature. Under the dim red emergency lighting, I could see that some of the samples still contained faint traces of luminescence, tiny particles that emitted a weak blue-green glow. I made sure the container seals were tight and double-checked that the preservation chemicals had been automatically added to prevent degradation of organic material. These samples would be invaluable for laboratory analysis. They might contain DNA from the creature, cellular structures from the bioluminescent organs, or chemical compounds that produce the hypnotic effect. I secured the sample rack with additional straps to ensure it would survive the ascent and recovery process. With the immediate scientific documentation complete, I turned my attention back to monitoring the explorer's systems. The emergency sonar pinged steadily, showing nothing but open water below me. The creature had truly retreated, at least for now. I kept one eye on the sonar display as I continued to ascend. Every 5 minutes, I reported my status to control as promised, providing my current depth, ascent rate, and emergency system status. The responses from Sophia grew clearer as I rose through the water column, the radio signal strengthening as the distance decreased. During one check-in, Carl Vargas himself came on the line. "Bell, this is Vargas. I'm prepping the remora now. We've got your ascent trajectory plotted and should intercept you at approximately 3000 m. How are your systems holding?" "Emergency power at 72%. Oxygen recycling stable. Ascent rate unchanged," I reported. "All other systems remain offline." "Copy that. We're monitoring a weather system moving into the area. Shouldn't affect the recovery, but be prepared for some turbulence when we reach shallower depths." "Understood." As the hours passed, fatigue began to set in. The adrenaline that had carried me through the encounter with the creature was wearing off, leaving me drained. I fought to keep my eyes open, focusing on the rhythmic ping of the sonar and the slow upward creep of the depth gauge. The lingering effects of exposure to the creature's hypnotic light patterns didn't help. Even hours later, I could still see those pulsing blue-green tendrils when I closed my eyes. My thoughts occasionally drifted and fragmented, requiring conscious effort to pull them back into focus. To stay alert, I continued to document additional observations and theories about the creature. Speaking into my tablet's recorder, I speculated about its evolutionary history, its place in the deep-sea ecosystem, and the biological mechanisms behind its bioluminescent display. The size and complexity of this organism suggests a stable, nutrient-rich habitat and a position at the top of its local food chain. I noted, "The question remains, what sustains a predator of this magnitude at such depths? The energy requirements must be enormous." Between recording sessions, I monitored the sonar vigilantly for any sign that the creature might be returning. Each ping revealed nothing but empty water, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept remembering that massive eye studying me with what had seemed like intelligence and purpose. The depth gauge now read 5,200 meters. I was making steady progress toward the surface, but still deep within the trench. The emergency lights cast red shadows across the instrument panel as I checked the oxygen levels again. The recycling system was performing better than expected in the colder water at this depth, extending my estimated remaining supply to nearly 5 hours. I reached out and touched the small plastic seahorse charm still taped to my console. "Thanks, Bruce," I murmured, thinking of Mary and how close I had come to never seeing her again. The simple good luck token had somehow survived the electrical surge that had fried most of the explorer's systems. A soft beep from the sonar pulled my attention back to the display. Something had briefly entered the outer edge of the detection range, then disappeared again. I straightened in my seat, fatigue momentarily forgotten, as I stared at the screen. The ping repeated, showing nothing but empty water. Had I imagined it? A ghost returned from debris in the water column, perhaps. Or was the massive creature following me, tracking my ascent from just beyond sonar range? I reached for the backup radio. Control, Explorer. Possible sonar contact at extreme range, bearing 220 degrees. Contact lost. Unable to confirm. Copy that, Explorer, Sophia responded. Maintain monitoring. Remora launching in approximately 40 minutes. Current intercept projection unchanged. I acknowledged the transmission and returned to watching the sonar display, fighting both exhaustion and the lingering effects of the creature's hypnotic influence as I drifted upward through the dark water. The red light of the sonar pulsed once more, but this time a distinct signature appeared. Not random noise. A pattern of movement. Whatever it was had changed course. Now moving on an intercept trajectory with my position. The math was simple and terrifying. The contact was gaining on me despite my ascent. I checked the emergency panel. According to the depth indicator, I'd risen to about 4,700 m, still miles from the surface and hours from rescue. The emergency buoyancy system was working as designed, providing a slow but steady ascent through the water column. The sonar pinged again. The contact was now clearly visible, its signature unmistakable. The massive organism I'd encountered below was following me upward. My pulse quickened as I studied the movement pattern. Deliberate, not random. It was tracking me. But why now? It had retreated when I'd overloaded the lighting system. Something must have drawn its attention again. I scanned the emergency systems panel, considering what had changed. The main power was dead, navigation offline, external sensors non-functional, but the emergency systems were active. The backup life support, the emergency buoyancy controls, the analog radio, all essential systems that operated on isolated circuits, generating their own electrical fields. The realization hit me with sudden clarity. The creature was sensitive to electrical impulses. It had to be. In the darkness of the deep ocean, beyond the reach of sunlight, electrical sensitivity would be an evolutionary advantage, allowing it to detect the bioelectric fields generated by other organisms. My emergency systems were broadcasting my location like a beacon. I grabbed the radio handset. Control, Explorer. I have a confirmed sonar contact, same signature as the deep-water organism. It's following me. Static crackled before Sophia's voice came through. Copy, Explorer. Can you confirm distance and approach vector? I checked the sonar again. Contact is approximately 800 meters below my position and closing. Current rate suggests intercept in under 15 minutes. There was a pause before Sophia responded. Remora deployment is proceeding, but intercept is still approximately 55 minutes away. Can you increase ascent rate? I glanced at the emergency buoyancy controls. Negative. Emergency buoyancy is at maximum. With main power out, I can't increase ascent speed. The truth of my situation settled over me. The lighting system that had driven the creature away was completely destroyed. The circuitry fried beyond repair. The Explorer's power reserve showed 81%, but that was only for emergency systems. I had no weapons, no deterrents, and nowhere to hide in the vast openness of the water column. Control. I believe the emergency systems are attracting it. The electrical signature from the backup power and life support. It must be sensitive to the fields they generate. Roman's voice replaced Sophia's. Marshall, is there any way to shield or minimize those signatures? I ran my hand through my hair, thinking quickly. Not without compromising life support. I need oxygen recycling and emergency power for ascent. The sonar pinged again. The contact had gained another 50 m. It's definitely following me, I reported, and it's accelerating. I stared at the emergency panel, calculating possibilities. If I shut down non-essential systems, I might reduce my electrical signature enough to become less noticeable, but I'd be compromising my already limited capabilities. The decision came down to a brutal calculus. Which systems could I sacrifice to improve my chances of survival? I needed life support, obviously. The emergency buoyancy system was critical for ascent, The radio was my only communication link to the surface. But the backup sensors, the internal lighting, the climate control system, those I could live without. Control. I'm going to power down non-essential systems to reduce my electrical signature. I'll maintain radio contact, but I'm shutting down everything I can spare. Understood, Explorer, Sophia replied. We'll maintain continuous monitoring from here. I reached for the emergency panel and began the process of shutting down systems one by one. The internal lighting went first, plunging the cabin into near-total darkness, except for the dim glow of the essential indicator lights. Next, I disabled the backup external sensors, the thermal regulation system, and the atmospheric monitoring. The cabin would get uncomfortable, but that was better than the alternative. As each system went offline, I watched the power consumption indicator drop. The Explorer became quieter, the hum of electronics fading to near silence. All that remained was the soft rhythm of the oxygen recycler and the occasional creak of the hull as I continued to ascend. The sonar pinged again. The contact was still approaching, but its progress had slowed slightly. I allowed myself a moment of hope. Perhaps the reduced electrical signature was making me harder to track. Then I saw it through the viewport. A faint blue-green glow in the darkness below. The bioluminescent tendrils had reappeared, but they were different now. Instead of the bright, hypnotic pulsing I'd seen earlier, they remained dim, almost stealthy, creeping through the water like searching fingers. The creature had changed its hunting strategy. It had learned from our previous encounter. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I was witnessing adaptive behavior from an organism that by all rights shouldn't exist. Not at this scale, not with this level of apparent intelligence. I grabbed the radio again. Control, I have visual confirmation. The bioluminescent structures are visible, but they're different. Dimmer, more controlled. It's adapting its hunting technique. Copy that, Explorer, Roman replied. Can you describe the new behavior pattern? I watched as the tendrils spread out in the water below me, forming a loose net rather than a concentrated display. It's using a search pattern now, spreading tendrils in multiple directions. The lights aren't pulsing or flashing. They're steady, dim. It's like it's trying not to announce its presence. That suggests advanced predatory intelligence, Roman said, his voice tight with professional excitement despite the danger. It's learning from experience. That's fascinating, Roman, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. But right now, that intelligence is focused on finding me. The Explorer suddenly rocked slightly, the motion subtle but unmistakable. I grabbed the console to steady myself, feeling the distinct shift in water pressure against the hull. The creature was close enough that its movement was creating currents strong enough to affect my vessel. Control, I'm experiencing turbulence. The organism is close enough to affect water flow around the Explorer. Through the viewport, I could see the bioluminescent tendrils spreading wider, forming a net below me that was slowly closing. The dim lights were approaching from multiple directions now, a strategic encirclement rather than a direct approach. Control, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the creature might hear me. It's surrounding the Explorer. The tendrils are approaching from all sides now. At current ascent rate, I won't clear the area before they reach me. Sophia's voice came through, calm but urgent. Marshal, recovery is still approximately 50 minutes out. The remora is descending as fast as safely possible, but we need you to buy time. I watched the creeping tendrils, their dim glow now visible from every direction I could see through the viewport. The creature had abandoned the hypnotic pulsing strategy that had failed earlier, instead opting for this stealthy, methodical approach. I'm running out of options. Control, I said, scanning the emergency systems panel for anything I might have missed. Main power is dead, lighting system destroyed. I've powered down everything non-essential. I stared at the power indicator. Emergency reserves at 79%. Not much, but perhaps enough for one more desperate gambit. Wait, I said, an idea forming. The creature responds to electrical signatures. That's what's drawing it to me. What are you thinking, Marshal? Roman asked. I studied the emergency systems diagram on the panel. If I could create an electrical discharge away from the Explorer, something stronger than my own signature, I might be able to distract it, draw it away from my position. How would you generate that kind of discharge? Sophia asked. I traced the power distribution lines on the diagram. The emergency battery system. If I could rig a way to send a controlled discharge through the water at a distance from the explorer. "Marshall, you're talking about deliberately shorting out part of your emergency power," Sophia warned. "That's extremely risky." "I know," I admitted, "but I've got enough reserve capacity to sacrifice some power if it buys me time." I looked around the cabin, thinking quickly. The external sample collection arm was still intact, though without main power, I couldn't extend or manipulate it. But the electrical connections to it were accessible through the maintenance panel near my feet. "I'm going to try something," I said, kneeling awkwardly in the confined space to access the panel. "The sample collection system is powered down, but I can rewire its connections to the emergency battery." I removed the panel cover and examined the wiring. The collection arm had its own dedicated power coupling that could be repurposed. With careful manipulation, I could create a circuit that would deliver a powerful electrical pulse through the water several hundred meters away from the explorer. "Control, I'm preparing to send an electrical discharge approximately 300 meters off my starboard side. I'm hoping it will create a stronger signature than the explorer's systems." "Understood," Sophia replied. "But Marshall, be careful. You can't afford to compromise your emergency power." I finished the rewiring, creating a crude but functional circuit that would channel power from the emergency battery to the external coupling of the sample collection arm. A timer switch would allow me to control the duration of the discharge. Through the viewport, I could see the bioluminescent tendrils continuing their approach, now less than 50 m from the explorer. I needed to act quickly. "Preparing to discharge now," I reported, setting the timer for a 3-second pulse. "Here goes." I activated the circuit. The emergency power indicator dipped slightly as electricity flowed through the improvised system. Outside, nothing was visible at first, but I kept my eyes on the bioluminescent tendrils. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, suddenly, the pattern of the lights shifted. The tendrils nearest to the starboard side paused, then changed direction, moving away from the explorer toward the location of the electrical discharge. "It's working," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "The tendrils are responding to the discharge. They're moving toward it." The strategy had worked, at least partially. Some of the bioluminescent structures had diverted toward the electrical disturbance, but others continued their approach from port and below. "I need to try again," I said, resetting the timer. "This time I'll target a different area." I adjusted the circuit to direct the discharge to a different external coupling point, this one located on the port side of the explorer. When the preparations were complete, I triggered another 3-second pulse. Again, the emergency power indicator dipped. Again, the bioluminescent tendrils reacted, those nearest to the port side changing course toward the new disturbance. The creature seemed confused, its coordinated approach now disrupted as different tendrils responded to different stimuli. I watched as the glowing structures moved away from the explorer, searching for the source of the electrical signals. "Control, it's working. The organism is responding to the electrical discharges, moving away from my position." "Good work, Marshall," Roman replied. "Remora descent continues, 43 minutes to intercept." I checked the emergency power reserves. The 71%. The discharges were depleting my battery faster than I'd anticipated, but the strategy was effective. I needed to be strategic with my remaining power. For the next 20 minutes, I continued the pattern, carefully timing electrical discharges at different points around the explorer, each time drawing portions of the bioluminescent field away from my position. The creature seemed increasingly disoriented, its hunting strategy disrupted by the conflicting signals. My power reserves continued to drop. 64%, then 57%, then 51%. I was gambling with my life support, but the alternative was worse. "Marshall, Remora has reached 3,000 miners," Sophia reported. "Intercept in approximately 15 minutes." I checked the sonar. The main body of the organism remained below me, but its tentacles and bioluminescent structures had spread out, following the electrical signals I'd been sending. I had managed to buy precious time. "I can see the recovery cables," I reported as the long, reinforced steel cables came into view, descending from above. "They're about 200 meters above my position." I prepared one final electrical discharge, this one stronger than the previous pulses, directing it to a point far below and away from the explorer. As I triggered the circuit, the emergency power indicator dropped sharply to 43%. The bioluminescent field reacted dramatically, the majority of the tendrils suddenly changing direction and descending rapidly toward the powerful electrical signature. For the moment, the area around the Explorer was clear. The recovery cables continued their descent, now less than 50 m above me. I watched them approach, fighting the urge to hold my breath. So close now. 30 seconds to cable contact, Sophia reported. Prepare for recovery procedure. I monitored the sonar, watching the organism's signature. It remained focused on the area of the last electrical discharge, but it wouldn't be distracted forever. The cables reached the Explorer, the magnetic locking mechanisms automatically securing around the designated attachment points with solid, reassuring clunks. Control, cables are secure, I reported, ready for ascent. Initiating recovery ascent now, Sophia confirmed. Hold tight, Marshall. I felt the Explorer lurch slightly as tension took up in the cables, then the satisfying sensation of accelerated upward movement. The ascent rate indicator showed we were now rising at 3 times the previous speed. On the sonar, I could see the organism beginning to move again, its massive form starting to ascend once more, but the recovery system was faster. The distance between us was increasing. I slumped back in my seat, the tension of the past hours finally catching up with me. The Explorer continued its ascent toward the surface, toward safety, leaving the extraordinary predator behind in the darkness. The sudden jolt of the Explorer breaking the surface sent water cascading down the viewport. Light flooded the cabin. Real sunlight, not the artificial glow of emergency systems or the hypnotic bioluminescence that nearly became my end. The Explorer rocked gently as the recovery crane's massive hooks secured the submersible. Through the viewport, I could make out figures rushing across the deck of the Horizon. My radio crackled with Sophia's voice, clear now without the miles of ocean between us. Marshall, hold tight. We're bringing you in now. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and gathered the sample containers. My hands were still shaking slightly, whether from adrenaline or the lingering effects of oxygen deprivation, I wasn't sure. The seahorse charm caught my eye, still taped to the console. I peeled it off and slipped it into my pocket. The Explorer swung through the air, water streaming from its damaged hull, before settling onto the deck with a metallic groan. I heard the muffled sounds of the crew outside, voices calling back and forth as they secured the vessel. When the main hatch finally opened, letting in a rush of fresh salt air, I had to squint against the brightness. Roman's face appeared in the opening, relief evident in his expression. "Welcome back to the world of the living," he said, extending a hand. I took it, letting him help pull me up and out of the hatch. My legs felt wobbly after hours cramped in the Explorer's cockpit. The deck of the Horizon was solid beneath my feet, almost disorienting after so long suspended in the water column. The research team crowded around, faces showing a mixture of relief, excitement, and concern. Bailey Green pushed forward, her clipboard already in hand, ready for the samples. "I need these analyzed immediately," I said, handing her the collection containers. "Priority on the water samples with trace bioluminescence. We need to know what we're dealing with at a cellular level." Bailey nodded, examining the containers with careful hands. "These look intact. I'll get them to the lab right away." Roman guided me away from the Explorer, his hand on my shoulder. His eyes kept darting to my face, assessing. "You look like hell," he said bluntly. "Feels appropriate," I replied. "I just escaped from there." As we walked toward the research center, I described what had happened after communications went down. The creature's pursuit, how it seemed to track the Explorer's electrical signature, the way I'd used controlled discharges to distract it. Roman listened intently, asking occasional questions about the organism's behavior and response patterns. "The size alone would make this a significant discovery," Roman said. "But the hunting strategy you're describing, using light as both lure and weapon, that's revolutionary." "It's not just a predator," I said, trying to find the words to convey what I'd experienced. There was intelligence there, purpose. It wasn't just reacting, it was calculating. We reached the medical bay where Milo Johnston was waiting. His neurologist's eyes were already analyzing me before I sat down on the examination table. "How's your cognitive function feeling? Any lingering effects from the light exposure?" Milo asked, pulling out a pen light and checking my pupil response. "I'm thinking clearly now," I said as he moved the light from one eye to the other. "But down there, it was like being drugged. The patterns pulled at something deep in my brain." Milo nodded, making notes on his tablet. Your EEG readings during the encounter showed activity consistent with hypnotic states. The creature might be using frequencies that directly affect the human brain's limbic system. He continued checking my vitals, listening to my breathing, examining the small cut on my forehead from when I'd been thrown against the control panel. Oxygen levels look good, he said after a few minutes. No signs of decompression issues, which makes sense given you were in a pressurized environment. But I want you to take it easy for the next 24 hours. That was an extreme stress situation. I'll try, I said, though we both knew that was unlikely given what we'd just discovered. Roman had been waiting by the door. When you're cleared, we need a full briefing. Everyone's waiting in the conference room. 30 minutes later, cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, I stood before the assembled research team. The excitement in the room was almost electric. Faces looked back at me with a mixture of awe and scientific hunger. What we've discovered, I began, isn't just a new species. It's an entirely new category of deep-sea predator that challenges our fundamental understanding of life at extreme depths. I detailed the encounter from beginning to end, describing the bioluminescent tendrils, the massive central body, the eye structure that tracked the explorer. The creature uses light as both lure and weapon, I explained. The bioluminescent display isn't just for attraction. It has hypnotic properties that affect consciousness. It creates patterns that induce a trance-like state, likely to immobilize prey before capturing it. Bailey raised her hand. Could this be similar to how some cephalopods use color patterns to mesmerize prey? Similar in concept, but vastly more advanced, I replied. This isn't just flashing colors. The patterns I observed had mathematical properties, rhythms that seemed designed to interface with neural processes. It was communicating directly with my brain. Sophia stepped forward with a tablet. We've got the footage ready to review. Most of the external cameras failed during the power surge, but we have about 40 minutes of usable video before that happened. The lights dimmed and the main screen lit up with the first images of the bioluminescent field. Even in the recording, the beauty of the light patterns was clear. Stop there, I said as the footage showed the first clear view of the central mass. That's the main body. Notice the texture, semi-translucent with visible internal structures. The team leaned forward, studying the image. I pointed out details, the connection points of the tendrils, the movement visible within the central mass, the proportion and scale that made this organism unlike anything previously documented. Play it forward to timecode 2214, I instructed. The footage advanced to show the massive eye emerging from the central mass. This eye structure is approximately 20 minors in diameter, I said, hearing several gasps from the team. And it wasn't just sensing light. It was tracking the explorer, showing active attention and response. We continued through the footage, analyzing the creature's reactions, the intensification of the light patterns, and finally the moment when the tentacles had first made contact with the explorer. The constriction force was enough to compromise hull integrity, I noted, as we watched the pressure readings change on the instrument panel visible in the internal camera feed. If the emergency protocols hadn't worked, the explorer would have been crushed. When the footage ended, cutting off as the electrical systems had failed, the room was quiet for a moment. Questions? Roman asked, breaking the silence. Hands shot up across the room, and for the next hour, I answered detailed questions about every aspect of the encounter. The team was particularly interested in the creature's response to the electrical discharges I'd used to distract it during the ascent. It suggests electroreception capabilities, I explained, which makes sense for a deep-sea predator. What's remarkable is how quickly it adapted its hunting strategy after the initial encounter. As the briefing wound down, I noticed Bella Santos sitting quietly in the back of the room. While the others filed out, she remained behind, a thoughtful expression on her face. Your macro-predator theory, I said, approaching her. You were right all along. Bella had been publishing papers for years on the possibility of massive predatory organisms in the deepest ocean trenches, work that had often been dismissed as speculative by more conservative colleagues. I never imagined something quite like this, she said, her voice quiet. The size, yes. The predatory behavior, yes. But the neural manipulation through light patterns, that's beyond anything I theorized. Yet you predicted the ecological niche it would occupy, I pointed out. You said there had to be apex predators even at those depths. Organisms that evolved specific adaptations to hunt in an environment we thought was too resource poor to support them. She nodded, finally allowing herself a small smile. The ecosystem dynamics demanded it. There had to be something at the top of the food chain. Your papers gave me the framework to understand what I was seeing down there, I told her. Without that, I might have misinterpreted everything. What happens now? She asked. We analyze the samples, we study the footage, and then we go back down. Better prepared this time. Later that evening, after hours of debriefing and sample analysis, I finally found a moment of privacy in my cabin. I pulled out my satellite phone and dialed Mary's number, calculating the time difference in my head. She'd be out of school by now. She answered on the third ring. Dad. Hey kiddo, I said, feeling a wave of relief at the sound of her voice. How's everything going? Good. We had a math test yesterday, and I think I aced it. How's your trip? Did you find anything cool? I smiled, looking down at the blue plastic seahorse charm I'd placed on my desk. You could say that. And guess what? Bruce brought me luck, just like you said he would. Really? What happened? I gave her the simplified version of events, describing an amazing deep-sea creature with beautiful lights, careful to leave out the more terrifying aspects of the encounter. Will it be in my science textbook? She asked, excitement in her voice. Someday I bet it will, I told her. This is a pretty big discovery. After promising to call again in a few days and reminding her to finish her science project, I ended the call. The simple normalcy of talking with Mary had grounded me after the surreal experience of the depths. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the encounter, analyzing details, considering implications. Eventually, I gave up trying and made my way to the deck. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the dark sky, their reflection dancing on the ocean surface. The water below us looked so ordinary from here, impossible to imagine what lurked miles beneath. I leaned against the railing, feeling the gentle motion of the ship, breathing in the clean salt air. Roman joined me after a while, offering a cup of coffee. Initial results from the samples are fascinating, he said. The bioluminescent material contains compounds we've never seen before. Bailey thinks they might have applications beyond marine biology, possibly in neuroscience or even medicine. I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. We need to go back down. Already planning it, Roman replied. We'll need to modify the Explorer first. Stronger hull, better shielding for the electrical systems, more sophisticated lighting arrays to counter the hypnotic effect. And better recording equipment, I added. We lost too much data when the systems failed. The university will fund whatever we need after they see what we've brought back, Roman said. This discovery changes everything we thought we knew about deep-sea ecosystems. We stood in silence for a while, contemplating the dark water. It's still down there, I said finally, waiting, and probably not alone. No, Roman agreed. Likely not alone at all. I looked up at the stars, then back to the water that hid so many secrets. The creature was out there in the darkness, along with other undiscovered wonders and dangers, waiting for us to find them. And despite everything, I couldn't wait to go looking.